Then I'll open this meeting and call this work session of the Eugene 4J School Board to order. It's February 2nd, 2022 at 5:31. And we have present in the room, we have board members Maya Rabasa, Mary Walston, Laurel O'Rourke, Martina Shabram, Alicia Hayes. Board member Gordon Leifer is not present tonight. We're all here virtually. So I welcome you to this work session because I'm really looking forward to hearing the report from our consultants, Pooja Bhatt and Amy Craig from Sea Change. And just to give you a few minutes background, or just a couple sentences background, in 2021, after we had voted to not have SROs in our schools, we realized, and then of course the pandemic hit, but we also realized that we really needed to get a very good assessment of what was going on in our district. We knew there was a lot going on, but we just wanted to get a picture. So we hired Sea Change to do a landscape assessment of our policies, of our data, both student achievement and student discipline, doing interviews with staff, and just doing really a 360 assessment of the district. And they gave us a report in August of the board, a report in August of 2021. And they offered an analysis of the strengths and challenges and opportunities of the board, and just sort of set the stage for us to talk about next steps. And I'm sure most of you have read that report. You know, we identified strengths, pockets of strengths. We identified disconnects and challenges and things to work on. And the good news is our school district leadership has taken on some of these things. So already they've made some progress on this. So beginning now in November of 2021, we contracted again with Sea Change to actually take the findings from their assessment and help us develop a work plan. And they worked very closely on this phase with our two directors of our equity, inclusion, and diversity or partnerships department, Larry Williams and Misael Flores Gutierrez. And so we're going to have that report now. And I'm just really excited to introduce Pooja and Amy to do that. And I don't know, Misael and Larry, you might be part of the presentation too. Great.
Thank you, Chair Newman, for having us. And I will allow Amy to say hello before we go ahead and screen share as well.
Hello, everybody. Amy Craig, nice to see you all.
So we can go ahead and screen share. We just want to thank you for having us be a partner in this work with you. I think, as Judy mentioned, we've been working with you all for at least a year, although I'm still having a hard time calibrating to it being 2022. So it seems like it's been a while. And as we started with the assessment, and now we're kind of moving into this next phase of work that we're excited to share with you today with this work plan. Next slide. So what we want to do today for this work session is really to first set some context, just a recap of timeline. We've all had a lot going on for us, so just going to recap a little bit about how we got here, just kind of acknowledging the concurrent crises that continue to go on, and just really take a moment to acknowledge the ways that resilience and strength is showing up across the district, both amongst all of you, amongst all of the staff, and amongst the students. So we want to take a moment to just ground ourselves in a little bit of that context before we're able to share this work plan with you that is really intended to be not necessarily a 5-year strategic plan, but a what can we do now situation. So we're excited to share with you some goals, both for the rest of this school year as well as for the next school year. Next slide. And you can go to the next slide. So let's set some context. So Um, as Chairman mentioned, right, we kind of came to this starting with a decision of the school, and this is just a selected timeline. Obviously, there's much more context that we won't have time to share, but from our perspectives, this is kind of some of the setup for the work plan. Obviously, in June of 2020, the school board decided to end the contract with Eugene Police Department for SROs effective December 2020. Shortly after that, the state of Oregon passed the All Students Belong rule, which is called the Every Students Belong rule now. That's really intended to make sure that schools are safe places for everybody, regardless of race, and really taking a stance around having a bias-free and hate-free learning environment, which of course contributes to making sure that every student feels like they belong. The state required that all districts across the state adopt their own policy that's aligned with that policy that was passed in September, and you all did that later in the year. And we were contracted with at some point in this process, and in August of 2021, we presented this student and school safety assessment to the board. What we found in that assessment was really that promising practices are happening throughout the district. For example, a lot of students are experiencing positive things like culturally affirming learning environments. Many educators believe that there's a focus on relationship building and social emotional needs. And there is growing diversity in the educator workforce. At the same time, we found that there's some of the system infrastructure issues that appear in many districts throughout the state and throughout the country, frankly. And some of these issues are very long-standing and go beyond any individual and are really deeply rooted and entrenched in systems that we see throughout our society. In Eugene 4J, that showed up as a disconnect between what students feel like are the most pressing safety issues around mental health and social emotional needs, and what district resources and policies and practices we're addressing. Again, we did this assessment back in the beginning of 2021. And since that time, there's been a lot of investments that we can talk a little bit about, but this is back, we're just trying to recap of where we kind of started. For many administrators and teachers across the districts, they also identified, you know what, we don't necessarily know what the clear goal is around safety and belonging. We're all working our butts off to make sure that kids feel safe, and we are doing our best possible work. But at the same time, there's a bit of disconnect about, are we working in silos? Are we working together? How do we work together? How do we communicate with each other? So there's the commitment to equity, but sometimes siloed initiatives and departments that really reduces the efficacy of these various initiatives with great intent, but just infrastructure issues like what are the conditions that we need to create in order to make sure all students belong, in order to make sure that adults are working together to make sure all students belong. Those are some of the issues that came up as opportunities for improvement in the assessment. We can go ahead to the next slide. So we wanted to just kind of name some of these big issues that we're all experiencing and feeling in this moment, and really for the past 2 years now. So with COVID, obviously, there's been a lot of transitions between the virtual environment, the in-person environment that's impacted many of us and the students that we work with in terms of illness. Many of us experienced loss in this past 2 years. Staffing shortages are showing up, burnout amongst all of us, right? And that really has led to a lot of stress, right? That's weighing on us. In addition to that is obviously this current pandemic around racism and how it shows up in our society, right? And the ways that students of color and teachers of color and staff of color in the district have been impacted are documented in the assessment that we provided last year, which is less belonging and safety for students and staff of color, and disproportionate discipline, again, that we see in 4J as well as many other districts throughout the country. A lot of these issues compounded with the COVID has continued to exacerbate racial trauma for many folks of color and with other intersectional marginalized identities. Can go to actually, I want to just pause here and just acknowledge that as board members and as school leaders, this moment in time is probably the most challenging time to lead in education in our history, from what we know. There is so much happening in our country, and what's happening in education, what school board members are having to navigate, both in Eugene 4J, as well as districts across the state and across the country, is a pattern. Regardless of where you sit in the political spectrum, it's weighing on all of us. And so we just want to name that it is hard stuff. And this is unprecedented, not to use an overused term, but this moment in time where we have an intersection of multiple social issues in our conversations, in our classrooms, is really unprecedented, and it's really hard. So we just want to acknowledge that, because you as board leaders and as you as district leaders really have a tremendous responsibility, and you are human beings too. So that all feels really heavy, but we want to also acknowledge the light in the district that's showing up. And resilience looks like all of us, all of you, all of those watching at home showing up, students showing up in class, even when it's hard, right? Even when you have to wear a mask because it's safe to do so. There's all these issues that you are showing up your own strength, developing new ways of working together, constantly innovating with the different challenges that the past 2 years have thrown all of our way, right? Trying to figure out what are the new paths. There's no template for what we all have been experiencing, but we're constantly learning new skills and knowledge. We're constantly trying to build connections with students, families, and colleagues and one another. And we're continuing the programs that we know strengthen connections. And so we mentioned some opportunities for improvement around the assessment that we did last summer, but these 3 bubbles at the bottom kind of represent some of the ways that the district has taken those opportunities and really worked to accept that invitation for improvement and deepen equity investments and priorities in the past year, to explore alternatives to SROs in the past year, and to strengthen wraparound supports. So from a staff level, there has been multiple more staff capacity added to the equity and inclusion team, an acknowledgement that equity is really something that is everybody's responsibility. And that team has continued to grow, more mental health support, more social worker support. And honestly, it is very challenging when staff are provided with a situation where they have a tremendous resource that they have relied upon. Regardless of what you think about school resource officers, our assessment showed that school administrators and others in the district relied upon them for certain functions. And so when the decision was made to end that SRO program, staff had to adapt to figure out how can we still be responsive to the needs of the people in our district that had certain functional requirements that were otherwise going to be unmet needs. And so there was some innovation that had to happen with the innovation of the Campus Monitor program that is covered in our work plan, that isn't intended to fully meet the needs of the SRO program by any means, because it has distinct purposes, but it is an example of the ways that alternatives are being explored throughout the past year. Go to the next slide. So, as we kind of mentioned, there's been a lot going on for us, some good, some not so good. And Amy and I have really been thinking about this idea of brain science that one of the staff in the district last week really brought my attention back to, which is where are our brains when we're experiencing the good and the not so good. And what we have noticed is, for students, for staff, for the board, there's so many factors that make it challenging for our brains to have space for thinking and for empathy and for learning. We've all heard about fight or flight, and brain research tells us that the best thinking that we can do, the best decision making that we can do, happens when we feel physically, emotionally, and psychologically safe. And when we are in fight or flight mode, that downstairs brain, that red brain, it's hard to make decisions. It's hard to take in new information, and it's hard to learn. And we share this because such important context for our work plan. And it connects so deeply to this work of how do we create the conditions for all students to belong? Because if they don't feel like they belong, if they're constantly in their feeling brain, their red brain, flipping their lid in their downstairs brain, how are they going to learn? And we also need to make sure that adults in the system, both you as board members, as school leaders, as educators working in the district, all feel like they can be their best selves in their thinking brain. And so what we want to share today in this work plan is really intending to address that there are adults who are trying to meet the needs of students. And we want to create the pathway for everybody to have their needs met.
Thanks, Pooja. So to pick up from there and thinking about the context for this work plan, just a reminder of how human we all are in this system. And we tried to craft a work plan with great feedback from great staff, including Larry and Misael, who are here, in a way that's realistic and achievable and builds trust and structures as we go. Knowing that the context we're in is a very challenging one, that not knowing, if you're gonna have to fill in for a fellow staff member tomorrow, or if your kid's gonna be sick and have to be home, that is a hard place in which to do new work. And so we've tried to structure this work plan to really get to priorities and to be strategic about those priorities to set up structures and systems. So that's what we're sharing with you today. We hope you'll have a chance to read the full work plan document. I believe it was emailed and should be in your board packets. What we're going to walk through tonight is high level. A lot of what's in here is meant to go deep in with the folks who need to go deep there. So there's roles for staff and roles for board and roles for equity committee, and there's details about those things in the work plan. And for tonight, we're going to share high level what's in here. So starting with goals, this overarching goal at the top and what you'll see in the work plan draws from the board's North Star around safety and belonging. So we pulled language from there, really, that we're working to strengthen and expand programs and policies that address inequities and feelings of safety and belonging, and discipline practices that disproportionately impact students of color, LGBTQ students, and students with disabilities. So that's the frame for this work plan. And then, as Pooja mentioned, this is not a 5-year work plan. This is a what can we do before the end of this school year, and what can we do next school year to strengthen safety and belonging in the district. So what's in here for this school year is really around roles and structures. So getting clarity on roles, the board's role, the staff role, and the equity committee's role in safety and belonging work, and creating structures, so policies, protocols, practices, meetings for the work to happen. And that's really this year. And again, we've tried to really prioritize, keep it small so it's actionable and there can be success, and success helps build trust and a practice of working together. So that's the plan for this year, the goal for this year. And for next year, it's really around vision and alignment. So getting into what does that shared understanding look like? How do we have a shared understanding of safety and belonging? Defining clear staff expectations and supports. So both what are staff responsible for and how can they be supported around safety and belonging? And then articulating accountability. So what is it that we're looking for? What are we going to expect to see in the district when we do this work together? I'll turn it back over to Pooja.
Yeah. Thank you. And I just want to say, as we go through these next 4-ish slides, if you have a clarifying question, please feel free to unmute and ask. If you have a deeper, more substantive question, then we would prefer if you can kind of hold on to that, and we'll get to that at the end and along with the discussion. But as Amy said, these 4 priorities are really intended to call in multiple different parts of your 4J education system, from staff to board, and the community, right? So for this first priority, it's really a call in for the staff. So what we envisioned is, we heard again and again from the interviews that Amy and I did over the past 2 months, is that and it really affirmed the findings from the assessment last year, is that there didn't necessarily seem to be a structure that could connect all of these really important initiatives that are being worked on across the district related to safety and belonging. There wasn't necessarily a structure to make decisions, to share information, and to work collaboratively across the district, not just district administration, but other staff throughout the district. And so what we have proposed in this work plan is to really launch a staff level safety and belonging action team. And the purpose of this action team is really to work cross staff in a work group to implement initiatives in this plan in sprints. So sprints are short duration, 3 to 4 months. They're actionable, they're achievable projects. And they would begin with the key staff who have been leading on the issues that you see in purple, really kind of sharing, this is the current state here of the issue. Here's the key questions or problems of practice that we're encountering. Invite additional ideas and questions from the group, make decisions, and communicate those decisions and the rationales for the decisions. This team, for those particular issues that they're working on in these sprints, would also define what are the measurable, realistic, and achievable goals for each of these initiatives. And we're not trying to prescribe every single issue area, but what we have proposed based on our interviews and based on the past work that we did with the assessment is that what you see on your screen on A through F are the kind of key top priority issues that we think could be workshopped as sprints for the next short duration. So we imagine that the work really starting in March, or maybe even sooner, would be defining what's the calendar of sprints on these issues, which is the most important to tackle first. Is it the racial harassment policy implementation after that gets adopted by the board? Is it professional development, and how do we make sure that we're prioritizing social emotional needs? Is it making sure that we have clarity around the campus monitor program and how that's rolling out? So we propose that a calendar be set for what months these issues will be workshopped, both in this school year and the following year, so that there's an ability for staff who are leading on those issues to be able to plan for them. And I really want to emphasize here that this work is not just the equity and inclusion team's responsibility. They're, of course, very, very foundational to this. And we know that equity and inclusion work and safety and belonging work is really everybody's responsibility. And so that is why we have this cross-staff work group proposed. And in the work plan, at the end of the work plan, there is a draft charter that goes into detail about who could be on this team, making sure that labor partners are included, making sure that it's not just district admin, but it's also including school level staff that have expertise in restorative practices and campus monitors and things like that. So we have proposed as much detail as we can to help get this jump started. The next body of work is something that you all are very familiar with as you're in the middle of having these conversations about the racial harassment policy. And we know those conversations are quickly evolving. So hopefully this is not already out of date, but and I think that it kind of is, because you have got some designated board members who are workshopping the draft policy with staff, and that's great. We would just recommend we put this on here so that it's very clearly connected to the overall goals that Amy kind of went over, and that it's very clear that this policy is relevant to the safety and belonging of students in the district. And then we imagine that the work after the policy is adopted is really around implementation, right? There is a lot in the policy that you're considering, and any policy is only as good as the way that that policy is implemented on the ground for people and by people. And so we imagine that the safety and belonging action team is kind of the holder of making sure that that implementation is going well and the collaboration is happening as appropriate with community members, and reporting is happening as appropriately with the board and eventually with the equity committee when that stood up. Pass it to you, Amy.
Yeah. So priority 3 is around relaunching the equity committee and developing a vision. There are only 4 priorities in this plan, so we're on number 3 of 4. And this one is starting with really tasking the equity committee, giving them a clear charter and goals for the remainder of this school year. We really see this committee as a space where a vision around safety and belonging can have legs, where it can come to life. Because our understanding is that with the state law and the new makeup of this community, there will be a broad array of community members, students, families, and some staff on this committee as well. So our hope and suggestion recommendation here is that they could lead this visioning work, answering questions like, what values does the community hold related to safety and belonging? What should every student experience to strengthen student belonging across 4J? So really setting that vision as a community group of what this looks like. And then our suggestion is definitely engaging district leadership and feedback on that vision and presenting the vision to the board. But giving the equity committee that task and empowering them to go deep in this conversation and develop a vision for the district. And then priority 4 is really around you all as school board leaders to be able to lead the safety and belonging work at the policy level. So as we talked about, having those clear roles and structures and policies and protocols in place helps us work together and build trust and sort of know what working together looks like, so that you can be ready to do things like comment on the vision and give feedback and ask questions and set up clear reporting structures for staff. So the immediate recommendation here is around determining a timeline and external facilitation support, if that feels right, to engage in anti-racism training, working on building relationships with each other, and identifying and adopting protocols and practices for working together and with staff. So as we mentioned, the goal again this year is really that clarity of role, clarity of structures. So that's how it shows up for board here, and then continuing to implement it in the next school year. So this is an overview of what those 4 priorities look like on a timeline. Again, we really wanted to make this as actionable and realistic as possible. So the things that starting this year for school board, that's the revise and adopt the harassment policy, and then working on building capacity as a board to work together and make decisions together. For district staff, that's launching the safety and belonging action team, as Pooja mentioned, setting a calendar and a structure for that will be a first step. And we've outlined some ideas for that in the report, in the work plan. And then lastly, the equity committee for them to get launched and begin to lead this conversation about safety and belonging vision. So I will pause there. That is the overview of the work plan. Again, the intent here was really to take the big assessment we did and presented in August and bring it into what could be done right now in the context that we're in with the capacity that we have. I'll pause there. Any clarifying questions? Okay. Well, questions might come to you. I know we just shared a lot and you may not have had a chance to look at the work plan yet. So questions might come up as you spend time with that too. What we wanted to do, excuse me, for the remainder of the meeting is really turn to discussion for you all. This is the end of our contract presenting this work plan. And so as Pooja mentioned, the real work happens in the implementation. So we wanted to create the space for you all to talk a little bit about what implementation looks like for you all in this work plan. And so we have a couple of discussion questions, and the purpose is really for you all to hear each other and hear what your needs are in this work, create the space for that conversation. So the first question we have here is, we've defined goals for the work plan with a focus on roles and structures for this school year. What could help the board clarify its role in safety and belonging, and what's currently getting in the way of that clarity? This is a meaty question, so I wonder if everyone wants to just take 2 minutes. You can turn off your camera if you'd like, think, jot some notes down for yourself, and then we'll open for discussion.
And then I'm thinking, Amy, when we have our discussion, could we not maybe share the screen? And
Yeah, then I'll turn the screen off.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I'll leave it up for now for the 2 minutes while you're thinking. Yeah. All right, if you want to wrap up your thought or keep thinking, but we'll open it up for discussion. Anyone like to start with something they feel like could help the board clarify its role in safety and belonging, or what's currently getting in the way of that clarity? Yeah, Judy.
I'll start just with some initial thoughts. I think part of this is wrapped up in really sort of understanding in general what the board's roles and responsibilities are. But for sure, I think we have a lot of agreement that we have a policy role for the district. And so when I think about this work, I think about a couple things. Some things that get discovered in the, I'm getting the words right, the safety and belonging action team work might really shine a light on some policies that we need to really look deeply at and maybe change as a district, that they might not be meeting the needs of the kind of work we want to do for anti-racist, having a school that's welcoming. So I see us getting possibly ideas from that. And then the other idea I had was, it seems like the equity team somehow sits between these, because you already mentioned that they might give some input, on the action team, maybe feedback, but they also are advisory to both the superintendent and the board. So that might be one of the ways that is a channel directly with us. So those are some initial thoughts.
Yeah, so being ready to be responsive to staff requests for policy change, if that's one of the pieces I heard, if things come up from the safety and belonging action team, and then clarifying that or acknowledging that sort of intermediary role of the equity committee perhaps, and what that relationship looks like. Yeah, thanks, Judy. I think Maya was next, and then Laurel.
Yeah, I want to shine a spotlight on one of the things that you all suggested already, and that's the anti-racist training, because that feels crucial to me for understanding our role in safety and belonging within the district. It feels as though, or it is true that so much of the barrier that keeps students and staff as well from feeling and experiencing a feeling of, and safety doesn't even feel like the right word, so I'm going to go with the new one, which is safeness, because safety has so many layers, especially in the last year or two. We've started to think about the concept of safety so differently. But those things are very much institutional. So as a board, we're the ones who hold the key to reshaping the institution. So it feels like that element of anti-racist training in relation to the institution, not just as individuals, but as individuals who have the chance to affect this huge construct that we're also challenged with, which is institutional racism. So I appreciate that you put that in there, and I just want to, again, shine a spotlight on that.
Yeah, thanks, Maya. So seeing that work as part of like unlocking even what your role is, how you lean into that role, is doing that work together. Thank you. Laurel.
Yes, is there space to hire somebody to actually kind of look at, I know you did some of this, but actually as far as implementation and working with staff, because honestly, a lot of racism is happening constantly on this board and has happened from the district and on this board while I've been here, and I've dealt with it as well as I can, but it's not talked about. We just had like 25 people write in asking for Mary Walston to step down, which is amazing, but the response our leadership made did not mention at all the racism that was the reason for that happening. So while I am not the person who makes these decisions, what I see with that is that we're refusing to see what's right in front of us. You know what I mean? It's not the fact somebody should do something or not. It's like you said, we're at a high level right here. It's here, it's in front of us. I mention it and it's still like, nope, you need to be quiet. Because that's the norm. That's what's been happening here for decades. So how do we do this work when the people that are supposed to implement the work don't understand the work that needs to be done, or that it's actually still happening? It's so prevalent. I don't know how to get past that, because nobody's talking about what's actually already happening. Oh, I should say 2 other board members are, but that's it.
Yeah, so that feels like a huge barrier to you all being able to work together, is just acknowledging the racism as it's happening on the board and elsewhere. And I heard your request for support with external facilitation might be helpful.
Well, I think there's professionals that can come in and look at the district and help with this, instead of people that don't look at this and assess this all the time. There are people out there that are the professionals who do come in and look at this and say, these are where we can shine. I mean, and help with our decision making. We know I really appreciated your report, by the way. We know some of it, but I don't think we have a culture where people are free to talk, say what's really happening. And when they do, I know this for a fact, they're told they're dangerous, and they don't move up in the organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I hear part of that challenge in getting clarity on roles and structures is even people feeling safe to express their opinion on those pieces or to share what they think needs to happen in the district.
I'm
Yeah, so
curious, Laurel, I appreciate the comments and sharing. It's going to help us to have an understanding of the suite of services and the supports that are needed, because that's kind of what we had started to do in the work planning process, is that if we think about safety and belonging, safeness, there's a suite of supports and services and infrastructure that is needed to hold that work. And there's individual capacities that we need as human beings who are doing the work together in order to create the conditions for us as adults to feel like we belong in a space, as well as for students to feel like we belong in a space. So I'm curious if you could say more about the types of specific technical assistance and services that you feel like that that would be helpful in addition to kind of anti-racism training. Are you talking about like individual coaching? Are you talking about something else that something else?
I muted myself. Yeah, individual coaching works. I don't hold a lot of faith in anti-racism training. And there is studies and information that backs me up on this. I mean, people get out of it what they want to get out of it. There's no, if there's not something where you're like, okay, now this is how we move forward and we're going to change our whole, we know this is embedded into our psyches, what's happening. So when I talk about it, I'm trying to shine a light and show it, but everybody hears it as you're looking at me like I'm bad, but I'm like, let's look at this. And everybody's like, somebody make her be quiet. Or let's find a way to shut down the voice. When I talk about me in this is happening throughout our district. We have letters, we're told about this over and over. So I look at this as what I'm seeing and what I'm dealing with is just like this narrow view, which has been fought I've been on the board, I think 6 months now, the entire time this has been happening. Can you imagine what is happening throughout the whole district if it started like the first month I was on the board? So the reality is we need, what's another, if there's a third party doing this work, coming in and with staff, their voice can be like, this is what needs to happen. And then we don't have staff who can't really feel free to talk, feeling like they're putting themselves on the line by saying this needs to stop. Some of them will, and I so appreciate those voices. But in the culture we have right now, people do not feel like they can talk freely because there are repercussions for that. And this is not hyperbole. This is what we know about the culture in our district right now.
yeah, so coaching and that accountability piece, or a third party who can be a voice who doesn't have the same restrictions as someone who gets a paycheck in the district. Alicia, I see your hands up.
Thank you. Thanks, Laurel, for that insight. I think we all approach this very differently, and what's really difficult is the work that I would wish I could do. I'm on a board, so when I do it with the 6 other board members, I'm doing it in public, and it's really hard to go deep when there are a bunch of people listening that you don't know. So figuring that out will be really important. I appreciate Laurel's voice. I do. It's shifted my voice because for years I've worked in institutions and have experienced, certainly I've seen and heard about racism. I personally have experienced ableism. I've experienced homophobia, and I've experienced it more with this board in the last few months, ableism and homophobia, than I ever have. And when I called it out, I got emails telling me I was crying white tears. And so it's really painful. We're in a very painful place in our nation. What can we do about that? I'm going to make mistakes. I know I'm going to make mistakes. The only way not to make mistakes is to keep my mouth shut and my head down. And that doesn't provide for change. So I'm willing to move forward and make those mistakes. But I think as a board, we have to figure out how to do that. And I think maybe that is the first thing we need to do, because otherwise, I don't want people to have to continue to say, you aren't doing enough. By the way, I don't think we're ever going to be able to do enough, because there's just so much to do, but we have to do, and we have to put our focus there. So I guess if I were supporting it, I think it's important that we as a board, that's one of the first things we do, is we figure out how we have authentic conversation about this, have a plan on how we can make mistakes and be supported. I'm not asking anyone to train me. I'm willing to move forward, make mistakes. The voices that have been added to our board have been very helpful to me. They've been very helpful in just taking a breath or taking a step back, however you want to see it, and saying, that is a way I've never looked at it before, and I want to look at it that way. At the same time, it's really hard when you want us to be able to say, I was wrong, or I looked at it that way, and there's a new way to look at it. But you've already been just wrung out and wrung over the coals before you get that chance. And maybe that's part of just needing to, my responsibility of needing to say, I hear it. I think we have major work to do. Certainly that's why we got you all on board. I certainly am committed to that and have been for years. I'm committed to that next level. And maybe as a board, that's what we need to do. We need to have that time for each one of us to make that commitment to each one of us. Again, that's how I see it. I am willing to say I could be wrong. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm hearing that challenge of being on a public body and trying to do this work together and navigating what that looks like to work and to try and to fail in public. And as we talked about, we're all human. And so like flipping to that emotional brain is a very normal reaction. So what does it look like to have practices and policies in place that can help support you all as board members have the conversations you need to have? I want to share one more question. I think we have about 12 minutes left. And I know there are board members we haven't heard from yet. So you could speak to the second question, or you could speak to the first one if there was something else you wanted to share. But wanted to offer this one too, that we're proposing the Safety and Belonging Action Team in the work plan to represent a structure for staff to collaboratively make decisions around key priorities. So when you think about the board structures for making decisions, what's currently working well when you're trying to make decisions together, and what might improve the board's ability to come to decisions? I'm guessing there might be interplay between what folks just shared and this question as well, but if you're thinking specifically about collaborative decision making, how you come to and make decisions together as a board, I'm curious if other things come up. And maybe for some board members we haven't heard from yet. So if you want to just take 2 minutes again to think about this one, and then we'll open for discussion. All right. You want to wrap up your last thought or keep thinking while others are talking? But I wanted to start with the board members we hadn't heard from yet. So if Martina or Mary wanted to share.
Well, I can jump in, I guess. And maybe my answer to this, unfortunately, is that I don't know how to answer this question. I think what has worked best for us this year has often been when we've had some outside support to facilitate conversations. And I would absolutely like us to continue doing that. I think that's the end. That's where I'm sitting right now.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Martina. So some outside support has been helpful, have someone else in the mix.
I guess it's my turn, and I too have problems kind of understanding what you're trying to get at here. So I think I would say clarity of purpose when it's on students, when the focus is on students, has made it easier to make decisions. And then in terms of what might improve, in my opinion, I think it's understanding that we have a highly competent and educated and experienced professional staff. They're there to support us, and they're doing their job under incredibly stressful conditions. And then understanding our roles as stewards in the community for the community's most precious asset, which are our children.
Thanks, Mary. So I heard like a focus on students can be really clarifying when it comes to making decisions. And then, yeah, thinking about those protocols, practices for board members. Thanks, Mary. Judy, I think I saw your hand up. Or maybe you didn't intend for it to be up. That's okay. Now it's back up.
I do have a comment to make, but
Okay.
I'm very happy to go last is all. So if anyone else wants to speak, that would be great.
We have about 6 minutes. Anyone else?
I have a question, which may be part of this. Are we able to renew your contract for the work you're doing? Because obviously we're not done.
Yeah, as we said, this work plan was the end of this contract. So I mean, we've definitely it's been an honor to work with you all and are deeply engaged in this district now. And so I would leave that to others to figure out what that looks like, what that ask looks like, but we are here.
Thanks for asking that question, Laurel. So, well, first of all, thank you. I really appreciated the comments of my fellow board members, and I just want to echo, I think your voice, Laurel, has really had me dig deeper in myself, and I appreciate that. And I think Alicia's comments about safety, I'm sitting here thinking, I've done a lot of research. So to your request, I was going to talk some about that tonight during my comments, but I've really been reaching out to interview people and talk because I agree we need help and we need the right supports. And it's probably a suite of supports. I liked that word. I don't know if you use that, who used that. So it's, of getting some individual kind of coaching, mediation, whatever you want to talk about, the kinds of trainings that we need that we can then implement maybe through coaching and also just some general board work. And again, I'll share some details, and I have lots of research to share and get people's input because we all have to agree on what would be helpful, I think. And the other piece is the safety piece. So every person I've talked to about helping coach or mediate has really had a concern about this all being in public, and just none of them have ever worked in that kind of venue. I'm not saying it's impossible, but to do this, it is vulnerable. And I think maybe people don't speak up or open their hearts as much because they are afraid of making a mistake. So figuring out how we can make mistakes together, I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think that was a great addition. So I just want to thank people. This is added to that. And I really do also appreciate Pooja and Amy's work with our staff together and us. And we could talk about as a board what we think might be helpful. So.
Thanks, Maya. I see your hand up, and then I'm going to turn it to Pooja to close.
So in terms of what could help to, I don't have the wording of the question, but what could help to make decisions, thinking specifically about this and the role of the equity committee as an advisory committee to us and to the superintendent. And I noticed the suggestion that you had to possibly have that facilitated by an outside facilitator. I think that I think that's a really valuable idea, and it might be something for us to discuss, maybe even asking you all to be those outside facilitators. The reason I think of that is I know those meetings are intended to be run by Larry and Misael, and sometimes when you're facilitating, it prevents you from being a participant in that actual work. And I think that we would be, it would be a richer process if we could have their voices incorporated into the work versus facilitating the conversation. So that was just my initial reaction. And then when Laurel mentioned extending a contract, I'm curious if that would be a way to incorporate you into that. But I just want the voices of the staff to be able to be as participatory and equalized as possible, and that would help prevent that possibility that leads some folks not being able to jump in because they're supposed to, when you facilitate, you're supposed to be neutral and kind of withdraw from the conversation. So that's just jumping back onto what Laurel was saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to let staff be staff in those places and not have to facilitate as well. To clarify, do we have till 7, Judy, or are we done at 6:30?
We schedule our board meetings at 7, so we
Okay.
like to have at least 15-minute break. So we could
Yeah.
go a little bit longer, but we want at least 15 minutes. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, we'll just see if there's any last questions, and if not, we'll give you extra time.
I see
I
Superintendent Vanderkaar's hand.
Yeah. Go ahead, Superintendent.
Thank you, Amy and Pooja, for meeting with us. And we got to see the report sooner than I believe everyone else. And so what I know is that Larry and Misael have both reached out to Brenda Brainerd, already have a meeting set up with her on Friday to ask her to facilitate our equity committee. And I believe she said yes, but I'll look for a nod. I spoke with her this morning and she didn't say no. So Misael, it's a yes, and you're just figuring out the details, correct? Yeah, so we heard what you said and we acted on it quickly. And I think we have a plan going forward just for what Maya just said, that it's really hard. Well, last year Misael was the one who ran the meeting and it was hard to participate when he was leading it. So I just want to give the board, I was going to announce it at the board meeting, but I said it right here. So anyway, that's why I had my hand up.
Thank you. Laurel, I see your hands up.
Well, that is not an outside person. That is somebody who's worked for the district, I think, for over 30 years. I would love an outside person who is trained and has knowledge around equity. She has knowledge, but I found some of the things that she said at our last meeting were not appropriate, were actually demeaning at times. And I felt she had an agenda. So I think that should be something we vote on. not just done, because it's really it's our committee to inform us, not just staff, correct? Could somebody help me with that?
I'll look up the actual wording of the Senate bill.
Yeah, I think that might be helpful. My understanding, not having the bill in front of me, is that it is an advisory body, and it's a very unique and powerful body in that it is really got parent engagement and student engagement as well. And I believe board representation would be on it. And so I think that's where it comes into play. Part of what is in the priority in our work plan is around the board's foundational work around how you work together and what your expectations are for the advisory committees and how you relate to them, knowing that there are no easy answers and that this work is really complex. It's not something that anybody has a template for in any district around the state or the country. And so I can't really speak to the details, but I guess Chair Newman, did you want to speak to that point? Because I wanted to say some other things, but I didn't want to get in your way if you did have a response to that question.
Well, actually, I had a conversation today about this. I want to go back and read I don't want to give any misinformation. I believe it is advisory to both of us. And I think that appointments, so I think we had two board members working with the superintendent and with our equity directors to identify people and appoint them. But who would do the rest? I really don't know. I'd have to check. So that's my best answer right now.
And I wanted to go back to just the invitation to think about how might the board create the conditions needed to have the conversations that you all feel like you need to have in a space that feels like it's going to be fruitful. The work of elected leaders like you all is very public. And I've worked for 2 elected officials in this state, and what I know that other jurisdictions, not necessarily education or school districts, but other public entities that have to abide by the same types of laws that you all do, sometimes have retreats that are not necessarily public, but there is going to be an attorney there and there is going to be kind of reporting, but you can still have the level of transparency that the public desires, but the public also desires functional elected officials that they elected to do their work, right? And so I think that's kind of the tension of we all want to have transparency, and we also want to have functional bodies that are able to work together in service of the people that elected them. And so I just want to offer that, just based on my knowledge of working with other elected officials, that there have been retreats that have had a lot of space to be able to have some really honest, in-depth conversations about racial equity. I also want to just share that I'll just identify it on a personal note as a queer brown woman who has worked in public service at the state level, at the city level, and worked with a lot of public education organizations and nonprofit organizations. We do a lot of work around supporting organizations live their values around racial equity. What we are constantly reminded of in our work is that everything can feel really personal, because we have the lived experience that kind of really continues to trigger some of us who have historically marginalized identities. At the same time, there is a place for individuals, and there are a place for institutions, and there are a place for systems. And the systems that we are all operating with, we're all acculturated to that because we grew up with these systems. We learn these systems, they're ingrained in us. And so we have to do our work to unlearn what we have been indoctrinated with from the beginning of our lives. And I say this as a brown Indian woman growing up in this country as queer, where I have had to fight a lot of anti-Black racism in my own family that has impacted me. And so I have to do that work about how to be anti-racist and how I show up in the work. But I just say this because it's not, we find that it's most productive to focus on how the system can work together in service of children at the end of the day. And individual relationships are absolutely foundational to be supportive to create those conditions for racial equity. At the same time, individuals alone can't do it all. And so I'm not sure if I'm making any sense, but I'm really just trying to call in the reflection on how we can focus on small, tangible changes that each of us have agency over every single day, and how we show up for ourselves and how we show up for each other, because ultimately we're all leaders in our own ways and how we show up for kids. So we really appreciate the opportunity to work with you all. We're never trying to sell any of our services at our work plan or anything. Really, we just appreciate the opportunity to support you all, and just really appreciating that this work is hard. There is no template, but we also acknowledge none of that makes it any easier for you all. So just appreciating the heaviness and also the opportunity that comes with it.
Thank you. I just wanted to share a thank you for the staff again, who gave us a lot of time they didn't have to help prepare this and really elevate some low-hanging fruit and ideas they thought they could move this year. So a huge appreciation for them and all that they're trying to do right now.
Thank you. I want to also just appreciate Sea Change and the work you've done. And again, our staff as well, who you did I really appreciate everyone pulling together to work, because this work is not going to happen unless we all do it together. And I think there's been a lot starting and a lot going on, and seeing that reflected in a work plan that maybe would help all of us with some manageable, achievable goals, but just keeping at it and seeing the progress, I think will really help. And so I just am real appreciative of everyone working together on this, and of the board and your comments. I'm looking forward to talk about this more and talk about next steps. I think that will be a really great conversation in terms of the board's role in this. So with that, unless anyone has any burning comments, I'm going to close this work session of the school board. And I think we can stay on this panelist link until 7 o'clock. Just put on mute and close our screens. Is that right, Lisa? Yes?
That is correct. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.